Hi, Alan Maloney here. I would like to take a few minutes today to speak with you about the status of science and especially science communication in our contemporary world. We live in an era which is sometimes referred to as the information age, and one might naively think that in the information age, science and its associated technology would be held in the highest regard. It turns out that that's not actually true. As seen by a survey from the Pew Center, the esteem with which Americans hold science over the past half dozen years has progressively been decreasing. The number of folks who view science positively, who view science having a positive impact on the world at large, is actually decreasing. And this paradoxical result really got my attention, and I began to think about why is this happening. And I think I've identified three potential factors. In addition, I've identified some potential solutions to mitigate this trend. So the first factor I think that bears on this trend is human nature and the way in which humans are persuaded by story. Humans are incredibly oriented towards story. We have myths which are thousands of years old and they stay with us to this very day. We see it in popular media all the time. The second factor that I think bears on the difficulty that science communication face these days, paradoxically, is social media. Social media has got a number of positive qualities to it, but it's got some real drawbacks and some particular dynamics which are problematic. So, social media is wonderful in that it democratizes the public square. Everyone is given a voice. The problem, of course, is that everyone's given the same size megaphone, and it's very hard to tease out the positive facts from the braying of people who are simply interested in self promotion. The other element of social media that's problematic is the dynamics and functioning of social media, what persuades people to engage social media. And the things which make social media more engaging may not actually be the best things to support the dissemination of science fact. Additionally, social media is a business, so there's an inherent bias towards wanting to get more and more engagement, not to focus on the quality of the engagement or the impact of the engagement. And this thought about bias leads to the third dynamic, which I think is related to why science communication is having some difficulty these days. And that is the presence of bias or a conflict of interest or motivated thinking that happens around science and scientific communication in the contemporary world. And that bias can be benign, and that bias can also take on a more negative and even malignant quality. So, the first dimension I want to talk about is human nature and what persuades humans. What is most persuasive to humans, turns out, is narrative, is story. And what's really incredibly impressive about narrative is that the easier the story it is to access, the more fluent, the more easily it's processed, the more persuasive it becomes. So it's not so much about what the most accurate explanation is, it's about what the most persuasive explanation is. And that's what people naturally tend towards. Now, this can be particularly problematic when the story, the narrative, is at odds with the facts. Paradoxically, in this 2019 study, we see an interesting phenomenon that when the facts are weak, as you see on the left side of the graph, the presence of a story can make the information much more persuasive. On the other hand, when the facts are strong, story may actually dilute the persuasive capacity of the facts and may actually not help advancing the dissemination of the insightful facts. But again, story is persuasive, it's easy. Facts are sometimes complicated and sometimes hard. And this creates a little bit of a problem for science and scientific communication because science is about facts, not just about a good story. The second consideration that bears on the status of science communications in the information age is the emergence of social media. Social media has absolutely exploded, and social media has many wonderful qualities to it. It really has democratized the public square. The problem is that it has its own dynamics and its own incentives, which may actually be garbling some of the discussion around facts and scientific dissemination. So, in this interesting 2018 study, A group of medical professionals were tested to see what would motivate them to share information, to share a rumor. They were given positive, hopeful rumors, they were given negative, dreadful rumors, and they were given some information which countered some of the content of the rumors. What the researchers found among this population of probably more sophisticated than typical population um, was that dread was the most persuasive motivator to share information. And that dread, the dreadfulness of a rumor, actually had an explanatory value of why people shared information, even more than whether or not the information was borne out by the facts. That when there was information which went against the dreadful rumor, people were still likely to share that information. So there's a little bit of a bias for acting on negative affect, which is part of what is the peculiar dynamic of social media. We can see that peculiar dynamic of social media in a 2021 study, which looks at the impact of moral outrage. And what the researchers found was that moral outrage was potentially self reinforcing, and that social learning played a role in amplifying moral outrage over time. And as outrage became more and more extreme, users became less and less likely to be constrained by social feedback, that the positions get polarized. And I think we've seen some of that in the political sphere, but that also creates a little bit of a wrinkle for communication about science, where engagement is the driving factor behind the business model of social media, and not education, not fact, not confirmed information. And so that does create a little bit of a wrinkle for us. It is a wonderful tool, but it has some peculiar dynamics, and it is motivated by a financial incentive that is not really reconciled with the primacy of advocating facts and fact based reporting. So that brings me to the third factor, which is what motivates people? What are people's biases? What are people's incentive? What are the conflict of interest that operate? Now, we all have perspective, therefore we all have bias. And bias isn't necessarily problematic. It can actually be somewhat benign. So a nice example of that would be going to a medical provider and presenting a problem. If you present that problem to a surgeon, there's a significant possibility they're going to come up with surgical solutions. Present that same problem to an internal medicine doc, you may in fact be more likely to get a medical solution. Now, neither provider is necessarily doing anything malign. They're simply referring to their area of expertise, their area of training, and their area of familiarity in producing solutions for you. But as an individual, you need to be mindful of the biases which are operating there. There are also other biases which are not quite as benign, more about self promotion or promotion of perspectives I want people to believe in because I believe in them. I want to have that affirmed. There are also some instances which are even less reputable, where people are standing to make financial gain. So if you have a talking head who's hawking a particular health regimen, it's important to know what that motivation is for them. They may be charming, they may be attractive, but they may really be driven principally by financial incentive. And so when you have a charismatic, juiced up former comedian promoting certain kinds of perspectives on the internet, you would want to think carefully about naively accepting their endorsement to a particular vitamin supplement, that there's clearly an incentive for them to advertise that. And social media, again, has clearly an incentive to engage users. And that combination, along with people's susceptibility to a good story, is one of the things that makes us more vulnerable to misinformation. There are also some more malignant forms of bias or conflict of interest, where individuals have intentionally misrepresented information and actually provided misinformation in the social media sphere to benefit themselves financially, offering information which has been proven wrong, which has been proven harmful, but would stand to make them considerable financial windfall. And we need to also be really careful about really bad actors like that. So one of the reasons I'm such an ardent advocate of the scientific method is it's a method. It's not just a topic. Science isn't a textbook, it's a process. And that process is wonderful because it's self-correcting. It tends to discover mistakes or frauds in time and reveal them. So the scientific method is a process which is engaged over and over again. It's a recursive process. So we ask questions based upon our assumptions, and we research the area of interest, and we ask a question and we test it with experiments, choosing the right methodology and analyzing it with the right statistical rigor. And then we report and share that information, which then is communicated to the broader community, which then allows us to update our understanding of the underlying questions. And the ability to update our prior understanding is actually quite a powerful one. It's one of the ways in which we make progress. And updating one's priors, fans of Bayes will recognize as being an essential insight in how we make progress in the scientific method. That over time, we're actually able to develop more sophisticated and more efficient questions because our understanding of the underlying mechanisms has been updated so we can ask more precise and sometimes more efficient questions. So I'd like to invite you to share with me some of my thoughts about the scientific method and scientific communication. I'd like to share with you why I think science is so important, how science can sometimes be fooled, but in time eventually gets corrected, how our updating our prior understanding of material facts can actually allow us to ask more efficient and more quickly consequential questions, how certain kinds of bias can be corrected for, compensated for, and identified, and how we as a community of uh, beneficiaries of science might best advocate for science in the information age. Thanks very much. Bye bye.